and gentlemen, welcome to the Good Roads Podcast. I am Jared LeMay, and the other half of this podcast dynamic duo, Thomas. It's been a hot minute since we dropped a new episode, but not for lack of trying. Is that not right, Mr. Bearcat?
That's true, Jared. Well, it was. You said it was a hot minute. It was also a hot summer, and I think it was good for us to kind of step away a little bit and come back refreshed with new ideas, new guests, and a bold schedule for the fall.
That is definitely true. And although it was a hot summer, people usually take summer for being pretty chill, but not around here at the Good Roads office. We've been burning the midnight oil on both ends, preparing for all of our initiatives coming up this fall and winter, right up until the 2023 Good Roads Conference, taking place once again in April at the beautiful Fairmont Royal York in downtown Toronto, because everybody seemed to have a fantastic time last year.
That's right.
But with all of these initiatives, we're preparing podcast episodes to correspond with them, such as our often referenced, not much talked about, Advocacy Day coming in November. So everybody will get to see the, lighter side of that. But today's episode, we're going to end our series on elections, as the third and final level of government is up for election at the end of October, correct?
That's right.
All right. So we've been through the federal elections last year, the provincial elections at the beginning of summer, and now we come to municipal elections, where we're going to do things a little bit differently here. In the past, we've discussed party platforms and what they mean for our members. This time around, with no parties to speak of, we'll be talking with today's guest about the role and direction of municipal politics is taking. So with that being said, I am proud to introduce our guest, a Good Roads Director, former Deputy Mayor and Councillor for Grey Highlands, former as of the end of October, if I'm not mistaken, and current Asset Coordinator and Financial Analyst for the Township of Southgate, and might I say, a really stand-up guy, Mr. Aakash Desai. Welcome to the Good Roads Podcast. It's a pleasure to finally have you on the show, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. That introduction flattered me a lot.
Well, every word of it is true, and I just want everybody to know that.
I have made no payments to neither Jared nor Thomas.
Yeah, we are not sponsored yet. Hint, hint, wink, wink. Anyway, I guess to start things off, why don't you give us a little heads up TLDR about yourself?
So my name is Aakash, and I moved to Canada when I was about 15, and I finished grade 11 and 12 in Brampton. My family moved full-time to Fleshiton, which is a part of Grey Highlands, in 2007 when my mum and dad bought a small family-run business. I completed my post-secondary education with a bachelor's in business administration because at the time, my dream was to be a corporate financial analyst, mainly because I'd given up on my dream of ever becoming Batman. Which is why when Jared started with na, I thought, am I being introduced this early?
If I'd known that, if I'd known you wanted to be Batman and not a soccer star or football star, I probably would have led with that.
No, as a kid, I always wanted to be a Batman because one of my teachers asked me, why do you want to be Batman and not Superman, like your friends? I said, well, when Superman's not Superman, he's Clark Kent.
Yeah.
Some random dude. When Batman's not Batman, he's rich and he's Bruce Wayne.
Right.
So you don't need superpowers, right. You just need a buttload of money to be a superhero.
And a buttload of brains.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true
right?
too, yes.
Right? So I graduated and I couldn't find any employment because it was at the end of during the economic downturn, and I was working away at mom and dad's motel and restaurant, trying to think of what's next. I've got my bachelor's. I don't want to waste away my life. And at the time, I wasn't a Canadian citizen yet, and so working in a restaurant, I kind of got talking to a few people, a lot of young people, the students who went to the high school across from the restaurant would come in, and I'd talk to them and, listen to what issues weren't being discussed at the council table. And in 2014, in April of 2014, I became a citizen, and I decided I'd be running for council at the time. Um, you know, I thought it'd keep me out of trouble.
So to summarize, you couldn't find any other job, so you decided to run for council. That was
Well, so the problem was I interviewed for a few positions, which were advertised as entry level, and I interviewed, and at one of them, the interviewer said, well, it would be nice if you had experience, and I said,
Oh,
well, it would be nice if you didn't advertise for an entry level position then, and I felt that was the end of my rope, and I said, okay, I'm going to take some time off because I can't do that at interviews. I can't go out and
no. Be
say, well,
that
maybe it would be nice
straightforward.
if you did that. So yeah, no, and I noticed that a lot of issues related to youth weren't being discussed at the council table, um, mainly because wasn't any younger people at the table, and um, generally younger people have a harder time going to the public meetings because they have other commitments such as kids, taking kids to hockey, taking kids to this, that, and the other thing. And as Jared mentioned while we were chatting earlier, going to hockey yourself and trying to find a
Yeah.
babysitter for your kid. So because of all this, even though there's evening public meetings, you're basically making a choice between going to a public meeting or doing something that allows you to relax or something for your kids, right? So you have those other commitments. So the youth perspective wasn't really coming forward. So I decided that I would, initially I didn't want to run for council. So I approached a few members of council, and one member of council said, I've been doing this job for X number of years, kid. I don't need you to tell me how to do it.
Ooh.
And
that's
I said,
condescending.
well, I guess that's a fair comment. And in the grand scheme of things, you wouldn't go to Wayne Gretzky and say, this is how you need to hit the puck or whatever, right? Um, so I said, okay, well, I'll run for council. I think I have good ideas. I think I have ideas that deserve to be heard. And if
Right.
people agree with that, then great. And if they don't, that's fine as well. I gave it a shot, and there's just not that appetite.
It
So
doesn't
yeah, I
doesn't
wanted to.
really doesn't really seem like the attitude. I guess the other counselor that you should have as a counselor. I mean, like you're trying to represent everybody, and I mean,
Right.
like you mentioned earlier, that's in where I'm from. Our region, we had an opening for council, and I saw I guess my position at Good Roads is a good way to help my community, and I mean, if somebody had come to me and said, yeah, your voice doesn't matter because I've been doing this for X amount of years, well, there's a good chance you've been doing it for X amount of years wrong. So,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it sounds like a good reason to run, actually. Like, if you don't see your voice being represented
Right.
or a
Yeah.
large group of people's voices being represented, you are now going to be that voice, and you were that voice.
Right. And I wanted to see some change in how we did things, a change in perspective, and so I
Yeah.
decided I'd give it a shot. A 23-year-old kid. Yeah, but
So
it was a lot of fun.
okay. So just to kind of sum that up in a sense, you decided to run in 2014 because you felt there was a group of people whose voice wasn't being heard, and you kind of wanted to help have that reflected in the decision making of municipal councils.
Correct.
Okay. Well, I think that's a very good reason to want to run and to kind of have that. And I think you mentioned if you lost whatever, but I think no one's made worse by putting their name forward for something like this. Running for public office, we need people who are willing to do that. It's not always the easiest job to do, and I kind of want to maybe shift a little bit to that. So you first got elected in 2014. You got reelected in 2018. You decided not to run again. So I guess what I want to ask is, what's changed since you were first elected, and why have you decided not to run again? Perhaps there's a connection there.
Yeah, so there's a few different factors at play here. The most important one for me. Earlier this year, I sat down, trying to think of what am I going to do with my platform? What will I have on my platform? And I realized it was still the same things. I wanted I wanted our decisions to reflect the impact that it had on younger people and younger families. I wanted us to increase our asset management spending. I wanted to increase our capital expenditures, infrastructure reserves, and so on. So looking at that, I said, well, it's very similar to what I had in 2014. It's very similar to what I had in 2018. If I continue to run, then it's hypocritical of me because I initially ran because I wanted to see change. If after 8 years I'm still running on the same platform, it means one of two things. One, I'm not doing anything at council and I'm not bringing these issues forward. Or two, I have brought them forward and I just haven't had enough purchase on them, and that's fine. And I'm still proud of the fact that when I first got onto council, we were making token contributions to our asset management reserve. Now every year we have a 1% set aside, 1% levy set aside to dedicated solely to asset management. So I've made some changes, or I've been able to force some change on that front. So it just, to me, it said, maybe these ideas need to come from a different voice, or it's just not the right time for these ideas for the population. And neither of those is wrong. I think I do honestly believe that municipalities should ignore asset management at their own peril. But at the end of the day, politics is a game of popularity and of votes from the electorate. So I can understand why elected officials choose to not say, well, we're going to raise taxes this much for infrastructure spending. It just doesn't sound attractive or sexy.
But at the same time with that, I'd rather somebody tell me the hard truth than sugarcoat it to get elected next election. I mean, that way of thinking that, I want to get elected again, so I'm going to say the popular thing, to me does not sound like somebody who should be in
part of democracy, though, Jared.
Yeah, they get elected. They get elected, Jared.
You can't make a change if you're not elected, right? Unfortunately,
that's the hard
great,
part,
but that's kind of
that's the hard part, though. I mean, you can't say, and you can't say that these people are the ones who should be elected and these people shouldn't, because it's democracy. But at the same time, you're making it harder on yourself, and you're doing the destructive thing by saying we can't raise taxes because of X, or meanwhile thinking that, that's going to get me elected.
But the problem is it does get people elected. I did a podcast with a friend in 2015 during the Conservative leadership race that saw Andrew Scheer get elected, and I forget, but there was one candidate who proposed lowering or eliminating the corporate tax, the corporate income tax, and we were talking about that, and the argument my friend made, I believe, was it's a good idea. And I said, well, that doesn't matter. It's not an electable idea. A good idea or a good policy is inherently something that can get you elected, because that's the whole point of politics. It's getting elected.
Right.
7 years from then, I've changed my mind. I don't agree. I'm not going to comment on whether eliminating corporate tax is a good policy or not, because that's not my bailiwick. But I have changed my opinion on good policy does not necessarily mean it gets you elected. Good policy is good on its own merit.
That's true.
That's the difference between 25-year-old Aakash and 32-year-old Aakash.
So you've learned then.
I've learned.
This is the big difference between 2014 and now.
Right? Yeah. And the other part of it as well. At 32, I'm looking for something that's more stable. That has a lifespan beyond 4 years, where it's easier for me now to go out and say, listen, I need I'm looking for a job, and it's easier for me to get a job now than it is in 2036 when I'll be turning 36, right? Or 2026 when I'll be turning 36. God, I spent 10 years. So I felt it was the right time to step away, because I didn't have new ideas necessarily to bring forward, or a new way to bring the same idea forward. And I was looking for some stability. And the last one, which I think not enough politicians talk about, is I've over the 8 years I've progressively seen the electorate get more rude, to put it in a better way, with their elected officials and municipal staff as well. We've forgotten how to disagree with people. If someone doesn't agree or do what we want them to do, they're either corrupt and taking bribes, or they're not listening to the people. Um, and I think people forget often that those 7 people, or how many ever people on your council that you've elected, are privy to certain information that you aren't necessarily privy to. They've done some further research that you necessarily haven't necessarily done. They forget this, and so therefore, when they disagree with something council's doing, it's well, you're not listening to the public, or you're corrupt and you're on the take, and um, it's unfortunate, but it does end up taking a heavy mental toll. Especially, I've always taken a lot of pride in the fact that as an elected official, I might not make a lot of money, I might not change the world, but I am helping my community, and I'm going to leave this job with my integrity intact. So when someone attacks my integrity by saying, well, you're on the take, or you're on this for yourself, it hurts that personal side of me, which, mentally speaking, isn't a fun place to be for me or for people around me, because obviously, if you're not mentally in a good place yourself, it rubs off and other people notice this, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we don't often talk about the electorate and the responsibility that the electorate has towards the elected official. We always talk about the elected official's responsibility to the electorate.
Right.
And I think the big thing about that too is the access to the elected official via social media. I mean, the internet's been a great thing, but social media has been an absolute train wreck. And
Yeah. And
the
I think,
access to the elected official 24 hours a day, and
yeah.
just the constant
Yeah.
being able to watch them and what they do and what they say, and being able to respond anonymously. Like, I forget who said it, but somebody said, like, a lot of these people who comment on Twitter aren't used to saying stuff in person and getting punched in the face. Like, when you have that fear of getting decked
Yeah.
for saying something stupid, then you're not going to say something stupid. But these people are anonymous, and they think they're anonymous, and
Yeah.
they come out and say whatever they want, or
Yeah.
trolls just to get a rise out of you.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think this is probably a huge hindrance to actually getting good people to want to run, and actually even having that diversity in people running. And like, let's be honest, women and people of color get this stuff a lot worse than others. And trying to convince them to want to run, and then they go and see these vile, attacks on social media, and sometimes it's, if they get doxxed or something, it's just like, why would, and for what? You're not, and like you said, Aakash, you're not going to get rich in municipal politics. And not that you need to get rich, but sometimes you weigh, me and my family and their well-being versus this. You want to make a difference. Is it worth it? A lot of the time, honestly, a lot of people probably make that analysis and say no, and
Right.
we're all worse off for that. Yeah, the electorate has to be, I think, in some sense, kind of like responsible for that. We all have to kind of do our part to foster a healthy democracy. And it's just really unfortunate the past 2 years with the pandemic and that lockdowns. A lot of people seem to have kind of, that level of anger has really kind of risen, and I'm hopefully it starts to come back down now that we've kind of resumed a sense of normalcy. But
Yeah.
I don't know.
I feel as a community, as a society, we're becoming very polarized. And that's at every level of government. At the municipal level, it's the electorate saying it's us versus staff and council. Because we don't have parties at the municipal level. At the provincial and federal level, we have parties, and I just feel that we're going down a very dangerous, slippery slope, where you're either with us or you're against us. There's no in between. There's no nuance to disagreements anymore. And I think that needs to change. When I decided I didn't want to run, I approached a few people because I still wanted younger people to be on council, and I approached a few people, and who and I'm not saying I'm the best judge of character, but these are people that I respect a lot. So I approached them and I said, "Hey, listen, I think you need to consider running." And they said, "I've seen what happened to you. Why would I put myself through that?" You know,
Right.
which is a fair point. And speaking of the pros and cons of the economical side of it, at the township of Southgate, I'm by no means a senior staff, but I make more money at the township of Southgate than I do as the deputy mayor of Grey Highlands, for significantly less stress. When I'm done
Yeah.
when I'm done work at 4, I'm done. I head out. I don't have to answer my phone. I don't have to answer emails. Um, Although there is an exception to that. I was on my way home one day, and someone called me and said, "My road is awful, and I need you to do something about it." And I said, "Okay, well, sure, sir. What road do you live on?" "Well, Southgate Road 28 or 26." It was a Southgate road, and I said, "Sir, I am the deputy mayor of Grey Highlands. I don't have control over Southgate roads." "Well, I know, but I also know you work at Southgate, so make it happen." I said, "Well, sir, I work in the finance department, not in the roads department. Here's the number for your deputy mayor. Maybe give him a call." So
And lose
that
the
was the only
attitude.
time,
You get a lot more flies with honey rather than vinegar, right?
right? uh, yeah.
So Akash, like on that note, it's interesting. You talked about the being on the elected side, being on the staff side. You're one of I don't want to say like it's not rare, but you're one of the few people who have actually been on both sides. And sometimes you see a staffer who's been there for a long time decide they want to run because they've anyways see how it works and all that sort of thing. But you're one of the few who's actually was elected first and then decided that they want to go to the staff side. Like, has this given you any unique perspectives that maybe others could benefit from hearing? Because you said that there seems to be this polarization not amongst just the electorate but amongst councils versus staff and that sort of thing. Is there anything there that you could share with us that might be just interesting for our listeners to hear or beneficial?
Yeah. So I think ever since I've been elected, I've always identified more with staff, because at the end of the day, they have the time resources really to do the research and bring recommendations forward. And as council, we're researching the recommendations and the pros and cons of those recommendations only, not the whole host of things that was done before the reports come to council. I also, the thing that attracted me towards moving to the staff side was the fact that it's subjective. You look at a problem and you say, okay, well, here's all the possible solutions. Of those possible solutions, these 3 solutions, for example, are objectively the best solutions or the best recommendations. You take that to council and they make that decision. On the council side, I felt it becomes a lot more subjective, where your consideration is not only operational, but it's also about, if I make this decision, what is the electorate going to say about it? And you're thinking of that side, the political side of things. And I unfortunately, given the structure of how municipal governance operates, I feel that it's inappropriate almost to do that, because councils are there effectively to manage. They're managing a corporation in the most base language. They're managing a corporation. So they really shouldn't be thinking of what's the electorate going to think of me in 4 years or 3, 2, 1 year. They should be thinking about what's the best decision I can make today that ensures the feasibility of this corporation into the future. And unfortunately, I found that it was an uphill battle for me at council to bring that forward and say, we can't think of 4 years from now. We have to think of 40 years from now. One of the things I like saying every budget meeting is, listen, we have to bite the bullet today, because if we don't, someone's going to have to make a meal out of a cannonball 40 years from now.
Yeah.
So it's I find that difference, that discrepancy of, there's an objective truth and then there's the subjective consideration. I struggled with that on the political side. And that's not to say that wrong decisions were made. I stand by every decision Grey Highlands or Grey County Council has made, regardless of which way I voted on it, because 7 people or 18 people discussed that subject, that topic, and a majority of that council voted accordingly. So I stand by those decisions, but I feel that that discrepancy of the objective truth versus the subjective considerations. I struggled with that on the political side. So, whereas on the staff side, it's the numbers are there, the data is there, and the data says something, and
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
It's I don't know what the word I'm looking for is here, but yeah, I definitely see what you're saying is it's objective versus subjective, and but at the end of the day, councilors, mayors, it's something that maybe you can't almost quantify. Like you say, there's political considerations, but at the end of the day, this is a democratic system, and their I guess decisions, they're reflecting the will of the people. If we want to go back to talking about it at the very base level, so yeah, they are running a corporation, but they're also accountable. They have a job interview every 4 years, and people can't say, well, or they can't say, well, I'm not being represented. Why would you make this decision? Because they either voted for them or they didn't, or but that's democracy. Like that's for better or for worse. That's just part of it, right?
true.
And at the
But
end of the day, too, being on both the political and the staff side, that the staff is bringing forth the best options to make the decision. So,
but staff doesn't have to worry about the same things as council, which is what.
No, but what I'm saying is, if you have an issue, staff says, okay, you have choice A, B, or C to make.
Yeah,
and then say council picks option C because they want to get elected in 3 years. That staff isn't floating C out there to get people elected. They're floating A, B, and C because those are the best 3 possible options. So at least they have merit to them, as opposed to, hey, what's going to get people elected?
And to talk on the topic of elections, I feel there's a quote by James Freeman Clark that I absolutely love, and he said, "A politician thinks of the next election, a statesman thinks of the next generation." And I think as an electorate, we would be better served if we elected statesmen rather than politicians.
Right.
And I don't mean to say that as a punch to the career of a politician, because I do think politics and being a politician is a noble career.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a different thing that bugs me, which we might talk about at a later time. But people giving the term politician a negative connotation. But
right.
I think we need politicians, we need statesmen who think of that next generation rather than just what can I do today to get me elected in 4 years.
So that's actually a fantastic quote, very, very apt, actually. What would you tell people to look for in terms of statesmen as opposed to politicians? I don't want to give it a negative connotation anymore after what you just said. What are you looking for in a statesman as opposed to somebody who's just in it to get elected every 4 years?
So, for one, I think you need someone who's able to analyze the challenges of the coming election, and I'm going to speak about this in terms of the upcoming election and the candidates within that. You need someone who can analyze the political changes that will come in the next 4 years. For example, just under asset management, each council will have to have 2 different updates to their asset management plan early on in this term of council. Next year, well, the deadlines are 24 and 25, but by the end of next year, councils will have to have their proposed levels of service prepared. So you want to ask them, what level of service would you propose? And the year after that, they're going to have to discuss and debate on how are they going to fund that level of service. So if someone says your taxes cannot go down, that's not a bad thing necessarily. It's up to you to make that value judgment of, am I willing to pay more taxes for the level of services I receive? And if it's a no, fair play to you. You can vote for someone who says, I will provide a lower level of service. What upsets me is there's candidates who are running saying, I will lower your taxes. And no one chooses to ask them, how will you do that? Are you cutting levels of service? Because at the end of the day, no matter what you do, if you're reducing taxes, you're cutting levels of service. If you're firing staff because I'm going to reduce the payroll, you're cutting levels of service, because right now 5 staff can respond to 10 emails a day. 4 staff will not respond to 10 emails a day. They can't. They physically can't, because municipalities as corporations, staff there are working beyond their limits, and putting more on their plate is not feasible, especially when the private sector offers much more lucrative pay packages, whether we like it or not.
Well, and the other thing too that Good Roads has been advocating for is more revenue generating options for municipalities, because currently all municipalities have for revenue generation is property taxes.
Yeah.
I mean, little things like bus service and stuff like that. But I mean, if you're lowering taxes, like you said, you're lowering levels of service. Your roads aren't going to get fixed in the time that they're supposed to. And that actually reminded me, I was on a Reddit forum the other day, which, take it with a grain of salt because it's Reddit, but they were complaining about how their one of their counselors who was running was talking about lowering taxes, and he mentioned this exact same thing: is, okay, if you're going to lower taxes, what are we losing? And I think his exact thing was, I'm going to run the city through a what was the word?
Forensic audit.
Forensic audit.
Forensic audit. Thank you. There you go. Forensic audit. And then the person's like, well, what if we're running at peak efficiency? Then how do you keep your promise?
Yeah.
So,
and again, that's effectively a candidate for mayor in Wasaga Beach has said, a property tax rebate in the first year, and then a property tax freeze for the 3 years following. So the way this would be financed is a forensic audit of the municipality. And the thing that got my goat on this was the candidate on their website said it might also uncover some nefarious activities at City Hall. Now, okay, what if there isn't nefarious activities at City Hall? What if it is? City Hall is in fact running efficiently. How do you keep your promise now? More importantly, if we look at the cost of gravel, I'm not even talking about asphalt right now, just the cost of gravel goes up exponentially and at a higher rate than the average consumer price index every year. On top of that, insurance costs go up significantly higher than annual CPI. So if you're going to freeze the taxes, you're still having to cut your levels of service because you're not bringing in more revenue.
Right.
So,
and at some point it's going to have to be made up, right? Whether it's in this term through cutting services, or if they get thrown out because everybody gets upset about the cuts in level of service, then the next council is going to have to go and make up for all that and raise taxes even more at once.
And then in 40 years, we end up with a $43 billion deficit in infrastructure.
34.7. According to
that's right now, though. That's right now.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Right now.
See, and that's the thing is that, it's just so, okay, everything we just talked about the past 5 minutes, the Globe and Mail recently had an editorial, I believe, and they talked about the rise of the unserious politician. And this is kind of what we're talking about, the unserious whenever you're just getting reelected, but also they just provide very simple solutions to very complex problems. And people like to kind of like neglect municipal government, but these are very complex issues. Asset management is a very good example of this. You have to maintain this, and if you don't, it's going to end up costing us more, all of us, in the long run. So you don't like that 3% increase in property tax now? Well, get ready for that 10% increase just to get it back up to the standard it should be at. Otherwise, we have to close that bridge, and you know what? That's not good for the economy, and we're all
No.
going to suffer from that too. But
Or
The
God forbid
example,
that
the
bridge falls
example I
apart
love
while
bringing up,
somebody's driving over and they die.
the example I love bringing up is the township of Meaford. Between 2005 and 2011, I want to say, it could have been 2009, but for a significant chunk of time, they froze their taxes. There was no tax increases. They depleted their reserves to the point where the provincial ministry had to come in and say, we're going to legislate that you have to have this level of tax increase to replenish your reserves. Now, Meaford is past that, and they had several double-digit increases. They're past that, and now every year they set aside, I believe it's 2.5% of levy increase simply for the roads and bridges. People tend to forget about that. This is not days gone by in the 1800s or the 1900s. This is in 2005. So 17 years ago, this happened, and people paid the price for it 10 years ago.
Well, and the thing with that, too, is if the provincial government comes down and says you've got to increase your taxes, how many people are going to move out of that city? And now your tax base just becomes even less, and that has to go up more. I guess alternatively to that, would the provincial government getting involved be necessarily a bad thing in the sense that, and I'm just sort of spitballing here, municipalities take care of a lot of roads in Ontario. What are we up, like 80% of the roads? Something like that? I'm just throwing a number out there. I know it's high.
I think between province and the across Canada, between the province and the federal government, they own and operate about 12% of roads, and municipalities across
88.
Canada operate the 88.
Okay, so what if the provincial and federal government got a little bit more involved? I guess with more money going towards the provinces to help them out with this. I mean, or not the provinces, the municipalities, because like I was saying earlier, municipalities only have essentially one form of revenue generation.
Yeah. Well, so Jared, that already kind of exists. Like, for example, the federal government used to be called the Gas Tax Fund. Now it's called the Canada Community Building Fund, and that's supposed to go to municipal infrastructure. But it's, even though, and the current federal government, we'll give them credit for that. I think they doubled it twice throughout the past decade or so, almost decade. And it's still not enough. Like, that's the thing.
Wow.
And because we still have this deficit, that's how big it is. That's how monumental the infrastructure deficit is, because there's a huge disconnect between who owns the assets and who has the taxation powers. And municipalities own the most, but don't have any, they can't afford to. This is a systemic issue. And honestly, I harp on this every time, and almost every policy thing I put out is that until this gets solved, it's going to be the same thing over and over again. Municipalities go to the province, cap in hand, give us more, give us more, give us more. It's just, I don't know how this changes. And how do you, and this thing, we're trying to talk about elections here. How do you go and communicate this to the average voter who, they're preoccupied with their own life, and they might just notice there's a bunch of potholes in the road or whatever, but they don't really know why. They don't see that there's this huge thing at play here. They just say, well, you should go fix my road. Why is my road messed up? Southgate mayor or Deputy Mayor Aakash, but and that's the thing. The electorate, it's not their job to know this stuff, but if they did, and if this could be communicated in a very, I guess, effective way, or broken down, let's say not oversimplified, but simple enough that the average person can understand, maybe, I don't know, maybe that's something that we'd see some, probably not.
That's sort of why I brought that up on this podcast, is because we have sort of simplified it down to that level, that we're looking for statesmen who will take this issue seriously and say, listen, we do have to increase property taxes or whatever the solution is, because, and I think we've done that actually pretty eloquently in the last 20 minutes about what the problems are and the solutions. Whereas if you get, say, a politician who's going to come in and say, well, I'll lower your taxes because there's corruption at City Hall and that's where your tax money is going. I mean, like I said, you've got to look for, well, like Aakash said, You got to look for the statesman versus the politician.
Right.
Yeah.
And this all has to do with municipal elections. And I think we've, even though we've sort of gotten out into the weeds a bit, we've brought it back fairly well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do think, unfortunately, the only feasible way for municipalities to resolve their asset management issues is through property taxation, because historically, um, councils have been focused on lower taxes rather than the level of service. My hope is that with the 24-25 update on asset management plans, the focus will shift from lower taxes to a level of service. If I could give you the same level of service as last year, but it's still going to cost more. So the days of people expecting and councils perhaps being able to deliver a 0% tax increase, they're behind us. That we don't, they're gone, and we should, as an electorate, we should understand that and accept it, instead of saying, you know, I need 0% taxes, or I need lower taxes.
Right. Okay. So let's shift gears here just for a bit. I want to kind of connect the dots between a few of the things that we've talked about. So we talked about voter polarization, abuse of officials. We talked about serious issues, serious politicians, unserious politicians. There's a huge level of voter apathy at the municipal level. It's always kind of been like this. I think the average voter turnout at the municipal elections is around 40%. I believe, according to AMO's stats that I pulled up just before this, in 2018, the average voter turnout was around 38%, which is, it's really bad. But then at the same time, we see this huge level of polarization and anger, and with the system, with how things are done, how things are run. How do we, I guess, in a sense, how do we convince people that like the municipal sector, the municipal level is something to focus their attention on and to actually be engaged in, not just once every 4 years, but throughout, because of these serious issues that we've just kind of talked about? Because you do have a lot of people coming forward and oversimplifying it and having these, quacky kind of solutions that are not going to help or just perpetuate the issues. But how do we get people to want to vote for the municipal election? Because the municipal government has the biggest impact in every person's day-to-day life. Like it's really important, but people don't see it. How do we make them see it?
That's a great question. That's usually how I start the answer when I don't know what the solution is.
Okay, well, how about this then? Why do you think there's widespread apathy? I mean, we even saw in the provincial election the lowest voter turnout in history, actually, in the spring's election. After we had,
it's concerning.
When we just had the biggest, crisis in our life, and certainly all of our lifetimes here, and people they're just tuned out. What do you any insights there? Why you think that is?
So I think, for one, the provincial turnout is concerning because generally I felt that municipal turnout has lagged about 20 points behind provincial turnout. In 2018, we had about in Grey Highlands or Grey Bruce, the provincial turnout was a little over 60%. The municipal turnout was around 40%. With the provincial turnout having been so low this year, I'm worried that you're going to have about a quarter of the electors voting a council in for 4 years. If the 20% point or 20 points figure is consistent, and it's definitely a concern. Because the people who get out to vote are usually the people who are unhappy with how things have been going. And I find a lot of these people are simply contrarians who are against everything. They want things to remain the way they were. As an example, at county council, I once made a statement that we need more density in Grey Bruce or in Grey County. And that could mean high-rise apartments, or low-rise apartments, but apartment buildings rather than single-family dwellings. That got published in an online newspaper, and someone shared that article with, "I don't want Grey Highlands to change. I like it the way it is." So I think, how do you make municipal government more attractive? How do you make it sexier? I don't know. At the end of the day, politics is not supposed to be entertaining or attractive, or it's supposed to be people coming together and saying, "All right, you know what? Let's get together with the one goal that we want to make a better community, a better
Right.
Grey Highlands, or a better Ontario, a better Canada, whatever that be." Um, I don't feel that that's what's happening, due to the polarization. And so people are tiring of that. And they're saying, it doesn't matter. One of the things I heard during the provincial elections, it doesn't matter what color gets voted in. They're all the same, anyways. Um, in Grey Highlands, there's 23 candidates running for 7 positions. There's 3 for mayor, three for deputy mayor, and 17 for 5 council positions. Now, a lot of those people are saying the same thing. I want to make your tax dollar work more, or, we need to find efficiencies. God, why did I not think of that? If only I thought of, looking for the efficiencies, right? But,
Oh,
so people are seeing this and they're saying, well, there's 17 people, all of whom are saying the same thing. What's the point, right? Um, so I think people have lost some faith, unfortunately, which, again, it should be concerning, because when
sure.
people lose faith in their government systems, their democratic systems, that's when you see populists come to power. They come to power when people are going through a rough time, or when people feel that their voice doesn't matter, and someone comes through and says, that they appeal to that core fear of, you think your voice doesn't matter, I'm going to make it matter, which, frankly, is how President Trump came to power. He appealed to that core fear of, it's not your fault that you don't have a job, or that the economy is bad. It's the elite, or it's the immigrants. So, unfortunately, we need to change that language in our politics and have a debate on the issues rather than attacking your opponent. You know, um, Give me a reason why I should take time out of my day and vote for you, instead of trying to give me 10 reasons as to why I should take time to vote against your opponent, right? And I feel that until that changes, and I wish I could be optimistic, but and I might get in trouble for saying this, but I think with the recent Conservative Party elections, again, I don't see much hope for that language changing, because the person that's been elected went out and socialized, for the lack of a better word, with the freedom truckers. Whatever their cause may have been, they tried to storm Parliament, and for someone who was in opposition at the time and now is the leader of the opposition to go out and socialize with these people who are trying to storm Parliament is not appropriate in a democracy.
yeah.
Um,
Wholeheartedly agree with you, Akash.
right? So I think that language needs to change if we want people to get back to the polls. And if people want that language to change, they need to get back to the polls. So it's a chicken and egg, which comes first, right?
Right.
Um, but yeah, it's hard, and I have little cause for optimism,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Well, I
I'm
guess,
sorry.
yeah. Okay. I was going to say, well, on that optimistic note, and I think Jared and I we're kind of getting close to the end of our time, but I think we wanted to kind of leave or finish this off with, some parting words or some advice you'd have maybe to somebody who, like, let's say, because I guess now it's too late to not to run if you haven't run, but someone who
Yeah.
already put their name forward, or somebody who gets newly elected in, at the end of October. What advice do you give as someone who's now, you're not running again? You can kind of look at it a little bit in the rear view, maybe be a little bit more candid, a little bit more honest. Do you have any advice, any parting words for them that you'd give?
Yeah, 3 things. The first one: make the tough decision. It's going to be hard, but it'll be okay, because the tough decisions are usually the right decisions. So make that tough decision. Don't worry about the backlash. Two, set boundaries on social media. Whether it's not having a social media presence at all, or it's having a social media presence from this time to this time during these days. Set those boundaries. It's something that I failed to do, and it led to me having several issues in my personal life because of that. And eventually it led to me taking Facebook off my phone entirely, because I had a hard time moderating the amount of social media I was consuming. Um, so that's two. And third is, don't be afraid to reach out, whether it's reaching out to someone on your council who you respect, don't necessarily agree with all the time, but you have respect for. Reach out to them. If it's a former member of council that you feel more comfortable talking to, reach out, talk to people, because some of these issues are not unique. When I come to the Good Roads Conference, I speak to several people who have the same issues that I have. And I usually think, well, gosh darn it, if we were all in the same council, we'd be amazing. But, so talk to other people, and they'll understand your position. Your family, your close friends, or family members might be able to empathize with you or show empathy to you, but people who've been in that situation can understand your position, the position that you're in, and they can provide advice or even words of encouragement sometimes, if not advice, saying it's going to be fine.
And that's
One
the
of the
good thing. That's the good thing about events like the Good Roads Conference is there are lots of people there to talk to, and it may be somebody who puts. Well, like you said, it may be somebody who's seen this issue before. It may be somebody who puts that issue in a different perspective for you so that you can come to a better understanding of it. But yeah, that's fantastic advice. Get out there and talk to people.
Mm-hmm. And, as always, if you ever want to talk to me, I'm quite readily available on LinkedIn and Twitter. I've kind of toned down my Facebook presence a little bit. But yeah, I'm easy to find. You can also find me on the Township of Southgate website for my email. After 55 days are up and my term has come to an end. No. So I think those are the three things that I tell in a heartbeat. I tell to anyone. Don't be afraid to look for help, whether it's from a member of council, former member of council, or even in some cases mental health help. I know several municipalities have started including their members of council on their employee assistance program. I know Highlands does it, Grey County does it. So, bring that before your council, and have an open conversation about it, because at the end of the day, it is a thankless job. And as much as everyone says, council is a team, it's true for the image you portray to the public. But at the end of the day, you're 7 individuals,
Right.
So yeah, don't be afraid to talk about the tough subjects and ask for help.
Awesome. Okay. All right. That about covers everything for this episode. Aakash, we want to thank you for joining us today. I know a lot of what you have to say, it's hard for some people to hear, but it needs to be said, and we need to be looking at municipal governments a little bit more pragmatically instead of falling into the pitfalls of populism and quick fix promises. So again, thank you for being here, and thank you for saying what needs to be said. For everybody else, not a problem. Remember to check out the new Good Roads website at goodroads.ca. Our fall and winter education offerings are now available for registration, so check them out under the education section. See how Good Roads can help you succeed in your career. While you're there, have a look at the Career Hub for all of the latest career postings from around the province, and see if anything there can help you out. Also, be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and now Instagram for up-to-date information on everything happening at Good Roads. If you're watching this video on YouTube, give us a thumbs up. Give us a comment. You know what? Today's Earth, Wind, and Fire Day. If you're commenting, let me know why it's Earth, Wind, and Fire Day.
Nobody knows what you're talking about, Jared.
They will. It was the 21st of September. That'll be a hint for you. So give us a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe, because it's not just the podcasts that go up here. We offer tons of great content to help you run your municipalities as efficiently as possible. If you have a comment, leave it for us. We love your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, everybody, take it easy.